The U.S. government has entered an unprecedented period of paralysis, a partial suspension of its operations that has now lasted 35 days, making this the longest shutdown in the country's modern history. For millions of Americans, this is no longer just a news story about disputes in Washington. It is a reality that is felt in everyday life, from delays in federal employee salaries to the suspension of social programs, from empty government offices to uncertainty at airports and courts. The situation seems particularly symbolic, as the protracted shutdown coincided with Election Day, a moment when the nation traditionally demonstrates its capacity for self-government and political renewal. This time, the day intended to strengthen citizens' trust in institutions came at a time when those very institutions were effectively shut down. The contrast reinforces the sense of political crisis and undermines faith in the system's ability to function, even in the face of ideological confrontation. The answer to why this breakdown has been so protracted lies in political and economic reasons and the architecture of institutions. Historically, there have been dozens of shutdowns in the US, but such long periods of government inaction are rare. The previous record, 34 days in 2018 to 2019, was already considered a painful blow to Congress's reputation at the time. Today, the situation is even more complicated. Public discontent is growing, the economy is facing real losses, and international partners are watching the weakening of political governance in the world's largest democracy. While some call what is happening a normal part of the democratic process, others see it as an alarming symptom of systemic dysfunction. The refusal of lawmakers to find a compromise on the budget has become more than just a matter of party differences. It has turned into a test of the stability of the entire model of separation of powers. Uncertainty lies ahead. The country faces a choice between political prestige and the functionality of the state. The current shutdown is based not so much on economic necessity as on political deadlock. Congress found itself in a situation where neither party was willing to compromise on fundamental funding issues, and compromise came to be seen not as an instrument of democracy, but as a sign of weakness. This is what made the current crisis particularly protracted and destructive. From the start of the budget negotiations, the positions of the parties remained diametrically opposed. Republicans, who control part of Congress, insisted on radical spending cuts and new restrictions on social support programs, arguing that without this it would be impossible to contain the growing budget deficit. Democrats, on the other hand, believed that such measures would hurt the most vulnerable segments of the population and undermine confidence in federal institutions. The key difficulty lay not only in disagreements over specific budget items, but also in the fact that both sides began to view the shutdown as a political weapon. Instead of seeking a temporary solution, adopting short-term funding, or extending last year's budget, both parties used the situation to demonstrate their ideological steadfastness. For some, it was a way to mobilize the electorate before the elections. For others, it was a way to prove that they would not yield to pressure from their opponents. The intensification of intra-party contradictions also played a special role. Among Republicans, the rift between moderate and radical factions widened, weakening their leaders' ability to reach agreements. A similar dynamic was observed among Democrats. Some of their representatives called for compromise, while others called for tougher confrontation. As a result, the budget standoff became a symbol of a deeper political problem, a crisis of trust between the branches of government. The Senate and the House of Representatives operate as two parallel worlds, where every initiative is blocked in the interest of the party. The inability to reach even a temporary agreement reflects the extent to which American politics has become polarized. Today, even the basic functioning of the state has become hostage to the struggle for electoral points. These political mechanisms translate directly into economic, social, and operational costs. The economic damage is growing daily and is already measured in billions. According to estimates by the Congressional Budget Office, the permanent loss to the U.S. economy is $14 billion, depending on the duration of the shutdown. Part of the lost output will not be compensated for even after work resumes. The scale of the human impact is also unprecedented. Approximately 670,000 federal employees have been furloughed, while another nearly 730,000 continue to perform their duties without pay, including workers in critical services. This is hitting family incomes, leading to mortgage and loan defaults, and reducing demand in federal cities. The social consequences are exacerbated by the freeze on support programs. The largest food program, SNAP, helped an average of 41.7 million people per month in fiscal year 2024, with an average payment of about $187 per person. Any funding delays instantly affect tens of millions of low-income families, and overload local food banks and charity networks. Transportation and security are already experiencing systemic pressure. Increased pressure on the TSA and air traffic controllers is leading to more flight delays. Relevant agencies are effectively operating in debt, which increases risks for transportation and logistics. If the shutdown continues, new restrictions are possible, including the temporary closure of certain areas of airspace, which threatens a chain of losses for businesses and regional tourism. On a domestic level, hundreds of thousands of families have been left without their full salaries. People are borrowing from relatives, selling belongings, and taking on extra jobs, and some federal employees are openly talking about their intention to leave the civil service. Those who are required to work shifts without pay are quickly burning out. Sick leave is on the rise, queues are forming at airports, and some days are marked by thousands of flight delays due to staff shortages. Additional stress is created by the protracted procedures for processing unemployment benefits for furloughed employees due to overloaded state systems. Taken together, this reinforces feelings of helplessness and distrust of the state, both as an employer and as a safety net. Moving from operational to political consequences, these disruptions are directly affecting voting. Low turnout, fueled by fatigue and disappointment, has increased the unpredictability of the results. For many voters, the shutdown is not an abstract dispute, but a personal experience of delayed payments and disruptions to everyday infrastructure. The shift is particularly noticeable among independents and moderates. Some are staying home, while others are choosing candidates who promise to quickly restore normal government operations. Campaign headquarters have quickly adjusted their messaging. Democrats are building their campaign around social instability and threats to jobs, linking the crisis to their opponents' irresponsibility. Republicans, on the other hand, are emphasizing the administration's excessive spending and management failures. For both sides, the shutdown has become a tool for mobilization, and at the same time a test of their ability to govern in a crisis. For independents and undecided voters, the shutdown could be decisive. Low turnout, caused by fatigue and disappointment, has amplified the effect of unpredictability. Some experts note that this crisis could change not only the distribution of votes, but also the long-term perception of the parties, which is seen as the party of responsibility and which as a source of chaos. Thus, the shutdown has turned from an administrative glitch into a full-fledged political factor, a litmus test of how much society trusts its government. The regions with a high proportion of federal employees and contractors bear the greatest burden. Here, the political factor quickly turns into operational risks for the elections themselves. In Northern Virginia, where there are about 189,000 federal employees, or 4.7% of the total workforce, funding disruptions for critical personnel increase the risk of late polling station openings and equipment delivery delays, which could reduce turnout during the morning rush hour and lengthen ballot processing times. In Maryland, authorities are recording a revenue shortfall of about $700,000 per day. At BWI Airport, operational vulnerabilities are increasing. Queues, flight, and staff reassignments. For counties adjacent to D.C., this means longer logistics for transporting ballot boxes and scanners, increased overtime and transportation costs, and in some areas the risk of queues forming at polling stations during the evening rush hour. In the District of Columbia itself, where federal agencies and contractors form the backbone of the economy, revenue projections have already been reduced by more than $1 billion over the next 3 years. Without stable federal funding, the risk of disruptions to city services, transportation, building security, utilities, increases. All of this directly affects the accessibility of polling stations. There has also been a rise in unemployment to 6% due to federal-level cutbacks, which places an additional burden on local services during periods of increased activity, including elections. In New York, the potential cumulative damage from the federal shutdown is estimated at approximately $1.2 billion per week. This affects contract payments, supply chains, and the operation of local election infrastructure, such as ballot printing and equipment transportation. In addition, several states are forced to cover the cost of the federal SNAP program from their own budgets. Louisiana, $150 million, New Mexico, $30 million, Vermont, $6.3 million. This reduces the flexibility of local finances and limits the ability to organize elections, renting facilities, paying staff overtime, and covering transportation costs. Overall, in regions with a high proportion of federal employees and contracts, the risks to elections and infrastructure are significantly higher. They range from direct financial losses to operational delays in logistics and security. Against the backdrop of the protracted shutdown, the political landscape in Washington has become an arena for mutual recriminations. Representatives of both parties are actively using the crisis in their public statements, trying to convince the public that the blame lies with their opponents. The president and congressional leaders exchange statements accusing each other of irresponsibility and political sabotage. Every interview and press conference becomes part of an electoral strategy, not a search for solutions, but preparation of arguments for future debates. Some governors and mayors openly criticize the federal government, saying that it is because of Washington's paralysis that local authorities are forced to take on additional expenses to support schools, social programs, and public safety. Intra-party differences have also intensified. Moderate politicians on both sides are calling for compromise, while radical factions are demanding to stand firm, which makes the situation even more deadlocked. Outside the U.S., the shutdown has caused growing confusion. European and Asian partners have expressed concern that the crisis is undermining confidence in America's ability to meet its international obligations. Business circles note that if the world's largest economy cannot finance its own institutions in a timely manner, it raises doubts about its financial reliability. As a result, the shutdown has become more than just an internal conflict. It has turned into a test of the United States' international authority. With each day of political inaction, not only the budget is at stake, but also the country's reputation as a predictable and responsible world leader. As the shutdown dragged on, public attention shifted from the details of the budget to the emotional perception of the crisis. News stories were dominated by images of empty government buildings, families of federal employees standing in line for food aid, and closed national parks. These images had a powerful symbolic effect. The state, once associated with reliability and power, appeared helpless and fragmented. The shutdown became one of the most discussed topics on social media. Under hashtags such as Shutdown Day 35, users shared stories about the difficulties their families were facing and expressed their outrage at politicians who continued to argue about principles while people were losing their income. For some, this crisis has become a reason to call for congressional reform, while for others, it is a symbol of the need to overhaul the entire political system. The media has actively reinforced the effect of polarization. Conservative publications accuse the administration of inefficiency and excessive spending, while liberal publications accuse Republicans of inaction and political blackmail. However, as fatigue sets in, society is increasingly responding in the same way, with indifference and cynicism. People no longer see the difference between the parties, believing that both have lost the ability to govern. Thus, the shutdown has become not just a political problem, but a mirror of the era, a reflection of the fatigue of a society that increasingly doubts that anyone in Washington is truly capable of resolving the crisis. After more than a month of inaction in Washington, the question is increasingly being asked how to end the shutdown without losing political face. There are several potential scenarios, each of which carries risks. The most obvious is the adoption of a temporary budget that would allow government agencies to reopen for a limited period. Such a move would give both sides time to negotiate, but it would require concessions, which means it could be perceived as a defeat by one of the leaders. The second option is a package deal, in which the parties simultaneously resolve the funding issue and include in the document a number of concessions related to other political issues, such as immigration or taxes. This path is more sustainable, but it requires trust, which is clearly lacking today. Some lawmakers are suggesting that the president use emergency powers to bypass Congress and temporarily fund critical services. However, such a move would spark a storm of legal disputes and further deepen the crisis of separation of powers. There is also a fourth scenario: public pressure. If Congress's approval ratings continue to fall, political campaign teams may decide that maintaining the shutdown is more dangerous for their electoral prospects than conceding to their opponents. In that case, a compromise may be reached not out of a desire to negotiate, but out of fear of losing voters. Whichever path is chosen, one thing is clear: a way out of the crisis will require not only a political solution, but also the restoration of basic trust between the branches of government. The shutdown has tested the resilience of institutions. The budget dispute has turned into a governance risk that has affected both the economy and the social contract. The numbers are important only insofar as they show the scale: billions of dollars in lost activity, and hundreds of thousands of workers without normal paychecks are not statistics, but indicators of declining manageability. The key lesson is not about who is to blame, but about where the system breaks down. First, short-term financing mechanisms have ceased to act as a safety net. When temporary solutions are used as a tool for exerting pressure, any delay is instantly passed on to critical services. Rules are needed to automate the basic financing of vital functions in the absence of a budget. Second, social protection and infrastructure have become too dependent on the political calendar. Political bargaining and operational stability should be separated. Secure protected contours for payments to vulnerable groups, aviation security, cyber protection of elections, and the work of key regulators. Third, trust is a resource that recovers more slowly than the economy. Transparent metrics of damage, public weekly reports on delayed payments, downtime, and economic losses, and automatic triggers for negotiations will help restore predictability. Finally, breaking out of the cycle of shutdowns requires not gestures of goodwill, but institutional reforms, procedures that prevent political competition from blocking the basic functions of the state. If these changes are not consolidated, the next budget impasse will again hit those who are least able to survive it.